make sure that the stream is working, because YouTube has this ass system where, like, all right, so it's 5, 7, 3. Okay, so YouTube has. All right, cool. So we are on. Why don't you say something?
Hi, how are y'all?
Okay, so.
I'm
All
Robert
right,
Schueller.
cool.
This is cool.
So, uh, little disorganized start because we got into a long conversation about philosophy and the state of the world. Um, but the conversation we're having now will also be about that, so at least we're primed for it. Um, so, for those of you who don't know, I'm running a series called Anti School. This isn't one of the elements of that series because this person is not anti school, and I don't want to be dishonest in the title. But this person certainly has some grievances with the way that the current school system is, and the way that it turns society, and the way society is. So, I figure it's also good to have people with that perspective on because, I can't just have the anti-school perspective and expect everybody to jump on board. I've got to get everybody on board gradually, get them to understand that even people who are running the system don't like it. And in this particular case, I have somebody on who has experienced from an urban perspective what a lot of people have not, as a teacher. And he's seen how the system is rigged against children, and he sort of wants to do it different. So, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about the place you teach and the general vibe you want to give off here.
Okay, so my name is Robert Schueller, and let's see, I've been teaching about 11 years now. I was originally a weatherman for National Weather Service, and woke up one day and said I wanted to do something else, and decided I wanted to work in museum curation doing medical history. And so I moved to ground zero for that, which is Memphis, Tennessee. And within about 8 months of grad school, figured out that I hated museums and I hated museum people. Like, they're the worst. Like, seriously. Museum people are the worst people in the world. If you have a chance to date a museum person, just do it for the horror experience, because once you're over that, everybody else will seem wonderful. So then started working with the kids and decided I love working with children. I hate adults, love kids, so could do that. And went to I had offers from a lot of different schools, but I picked the worst school in the state of Tennessee. A school so bad that was on Fox News nationwide about how horrible we were. Police would come in with pepper spray about 3 times a month. We'd get pepper spray raided. We brought back a kid in a body bag from senior trip. Had 6 kids die in about 5 years of working there. And we went from being one of the worst schools in the state to being in the top quarter. And I learned a lot about kids and about this idea that kids are disposable, and which became ingrained in our system, and was something that we worked on. After that, had an opportunity to work with refugees from Syria and Yemen who had come to the United States. So worked with Islamic students in an Islamic school, worked to close a Catholic school. Catholic school was closing to become a public school. And so I got to work through that transition, got to spend a little bit of time being a principal in a Jewish school. And so now I work in a charter school in Memphis. Charter schools are very different than they are in Memphis and anywhere else. We're really like sort of a fire break for kids. It's a place for the kids to go instead of being in their community schools, which can be really rough, but they're not quite ready to be in the optional higher end schools. So we sort of fill a middle gap for that. It's not like, oh, everybody's taking money or something like that. We're just scraping like everybody else. But it's a good middle position to be in, where we can really work with smaller groups of kids. But we still have sort of the same problems that we have systemically, and the system is damaged. It's a problem, and to make it clear, union teacher, believe in the union, believe in teaching, believe in school, but I also I understand why people would homeschool. I'm all for homeschooling as well. I think that if you can homeschool your kids and you have the wherewithal and ability to be able to do it, mashallah, do it. You know, um, but I think that the system, the way we're doing things, is problematic.
Right. Well, so let me talk about one of the things that I saw that was interesting on your timeline here. So, I always sort of scroll the timelines of the people that I'm trying to talk to get a feel for what they think. Um, so let's get a little bit topical here. Let's talk about the coronavirus and the online versus virtual, or sorry, versus physical learning. So I remember seeing a tweet where you said that there are teachers saying that you shouldn't teach online, or that there should be a space for physicality or whatever. And you said that, while you're worried about a virus, my kids are still learning. Um, so by that token, how do you measure performance, like with online versus normal, like physical schooling?
So it, it's odd because it's a mixed bag, and this is why. Um, the one thing that we have to remember, or I think is hard for people to understand, is that children, students, scholars, particularly in that 17 to 18, 16 range that I'm dealing with, have no idea how to operate a computer. Like that is something that we have. If you look at something that systemically that we failed, I mean, failed grievously, failed these students, was teaching them how to use the computer. You'll hear it all the time where adults will say, "Oh no, they don't know how to use the computer," right? They're not exposed to it. So part of the problem, and this is where it was problem versus opportunity, because in any setting, whether we're online or whether we're in person, every interaction with a kid is an opportunity, right? And I heard nothing but complaints. Oh, and it was weird because it was the same complaints we were getting, I was hearing in the classroom. Oh, I can't get these kids to do anything. Oh, I can't do this. You were saying that last 2 years ago when we were in person, right? And so, I've asked them, okay, so I'll get a kid. How, have you ever had a teacher take over your computer, right? Basic idea of how you teach somebody how to do something with computer, you can show them, you can take over their computer for a second and then slow release them back, right? We had these glorious opportunities to forget about trying to teach some sort of specific pedagogy and actually teach people skills that they could use, right? Where you can take over a computer, you can tell them how to manipulate a file, we can tell them how to create art online, we can embrace them as individuals because we have that moment to chat with them. And you can be a lot more direct chatting with someone sometimes than being even face to face. But the same holes in the road that we had when we were meeting in person systemically are the same roads in the hole that we had when we're meeting online, which are exactly the same holes in the road when we're going to get back together, right? If you're not, if you're trying to teach some little weird specific thing that you're trying to teach them how to do in some sort of rote method or whatever you're using, is a lot less effective than actually teaching them a skill of how to actually use the tools around them.
Right. Well, and so on that score, um, Your handle is urban teacher,
Right.
and I'm assuming that part of what carries along with that is uh, the fact that in urban settings, especially inner cities, shit is
Right.
dramatically fucking underfunded and has been for a while.
On
And
every level, not just systemically, but individualistically.
right,
Yeah.
and part of that is the result of like sort of entrenched systemic bias against those areas and the people within
Can,
them, partially
can
through
you give me an
racism.
example of that? In
Well, so like for instance, um, those areas are over policed. The police
right.
are going to go to those areas more, which means that those areas are going to have disproportionately broken up families. Those
Right.
broken up families are going to be less able to take care of kids, and
Exactly.
that'll radiate. It'll have a
100.
domino or a butterfly effect, and generally speaking, what that'll eventually result in is lower intergenerational wealth until the place is so poor that they'll, sell themselves out for a box of crackers. And the general vibe is that a lot of these people couldn't even afford computers for their kids to begin with, and that's the reason their kid didn't know how to use them.
Yeah.
So,
I, I I think that so this is I think this is the one thing too that so for instance I had kids who were when I'm engaged with them, they got 3 or 4 kids that they're watching at the same time, right? So they are the primary house. They're taking care of the house. They're taking care of all the kids that are there in the house. Sometimes 4 or 5 kids, and the adults are off. The thing is the same thing that they're going through while I'm actually watching it, or the same thing they're going through when they go home. And it's this reinforced sort of insanity that we have, and so yeah.
okay, so in that regard, first off, there's been a positive correlation between doing well in school and having more wealth in an area anyway, which is one of the
Right.
reasons. So ultimately, like, how much of a positive impact do you think good teachers have, and what sort of qualifications would you say would need to be for you to call somebody a bad teacher?
Okay, so positive impact. I'll give you an example of a positive example here in Memphis. Is that we had a student who, like I said, worst school, struggling school, unbelievably horrible situation, and this student went away. We got a degree. If you ever want to look this student up, it's Justin J. Pearson. And so became president of his elite New England college, like went away and now has come back. And, what he's doing is he's fighting against the government and against local companies taking over property here in the inner city. So he's leading that fight, right, to stop a pipeline that was being built through eminent domain through inner city conditions, right, through inner city neighborhoods. And so that's where we empower a student, right, to think for themselves, to have that ability to be one of those points that stop, the craziness that the government, that society is trying to enforce racist environmental policies in the inner city. Those are things where they can come back and they can fight. We can empower those students, and I think that the measure of our success is that it's the measure of what we're actually doing to make our community better, right? And we do that through generational change, through kids developing positivity. The negative part is it becomes like, okay, so imagine a darkened street in a horrible neighborhood and everything's crap, and you fix up your house and you repair You repair the street light out in front of your house, right? And so everything else is crap, but you got this light on that's sort of shining the light on all the other problems. What's going to happen? They're going to come out and they're going to bust that light out.
Mm-hmm.
And so the measure of a bad instructor or a bad teacher or a bad system is one that tries to suppress those positive actions of individuality, of the power of the individual, that you really see how systemically they try, that there are systems, there are people in that system that fight every way they can to knock that light out, to make it dark.
Right. You know, and so a personal story here. I grew up in the ass end of nowhere. They cook more meth out there than they do produce like world leaders. But like the general idea that one of the things that I hated about school was that instead of letting me learn, they wanted to teach me, meaning that they wanted their shit to be the thing that happened rather than what might work for the individual. So I felt all controlled and shiz. Like, I still remember this time when a teacher assigned reading of Huckleberry Finn and then got mad when I used the words that were in the book. And instead of like reacting like maybe this was a bad idea and this shouldn't have been in the curriculum, uh, th- she got the entire class to basically peer pressure me into doing what she wanted. And ultimately, that was one of the things that made me start to hate school, is to sort of realize that it was nothing but a peer pressure mechanism to like get people to conform to a certain way of thinking. This was true in multiple other circumstances and avenues I could mention, but I'll stick with that one because it's a very good sort of starting point. But like eventually, I got through most of high school, and I had failed like 70% of my classes. So I basically needed to do 3 years worth of work in one. So I went to a continuation school where I was allowed to listen to music and work at my own pace.
Right.
And because of that, um, it changed the work from sort of rote regurgitation bullshit and trying to conform to their standards, and more setting my own standards and then holding myself up to those. And
Right.
because of that, I successfully did get 3 years of high school done in one, being the senior year of high school and basically the 2 years worth of credits that I had messed up. And I feel like I was robbed of those first several years because I think I could have gotten all my high school done before I was 17. And I resent the fact that the school system sort of suppressed my ability to learn at the expense of, like, maybe we'll send more funding to the football team than we will to the teachers that are actually good at what they do. And as a result, the school system sort of took a back seat to the image of the school system. Would you say that that's an accurate assessment of
I,
school,
I,
that it takes a back seat to its image?
I would say this, that I would go a step further. This is the way that I describe it. The educational model that we're using is extravagant in its waste of life. And when you really start to think about that, and I talk about this in my class. I say there's 5 steps, right? You get 5 steps in life. If you figure your life in a measure of numbers, you get about 5 of them. And you've already used up one entire step by the time you graduate. 1/5 of your life is gone.
Right.
And the vast majority of that gone is waste. Like it is literally the most wasteful and unproductive use of time imaginable.
Right.
so
And
so I actually think that the way that you're sort of phrasing it is nice. That yeah, we waste time and we know we're not. No, we are extravagant wasters of life. like we literally started and go, how, it's almost targeted. Like how much of these children's lives, it's like we actually go out of our way to figure out how much time we can actually waste in people's lives and how many lives can be wasted in a matter of the time that we hold it.
Right. Well, so let me ask you, if we're talking about that, how best do you think time can be economized in this environment?
So a lot of it, a lot of our wastage is in it. So, well, first of all, like the number one thing is economy of assignment, right? Like, so you can sit and so, for instance, one of the things that you said a minute ago was that, here I was, and I felt like I wasted all this time because I finished 3 years of work in like less than a year, and how, like, oh my God, they stole all that time from me. And you're right. So, like, one of the changes, and I think this is one of the changes that I have brought out. I typically get the reaction to this is not necessarily a good one among my peers. But for instance, I don't use deadlines, right? If you can get something done effectively in 2 days, right? Then why am I going to make you work on it for a week or 2 weeks? However, by the same token, I may have a student that's going to take 2 weeks. And so allowing students that feeling of control, ownership over their own education. So a good example is when you come in, let me ask you a question. You've walked into God knows how many classrooms in your educational history. You walked into hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of classrooms, right?
Right.
How many times has the teacher said thank you for being here to you?
0.
Every day when I start my class, in every class that I start, I've had 2,108 students, and I've thanked each and every one of them. And not just at the beginning of the year, but periodically throughout. But also, I make a point of it almost every day to say thank you. Because this isn't my education. This is theirs, and they're entrusting it to me. And I think the fact that you went through, and you're not unique. I've asked this of students. I've taught 2,108 kids, and none of them has ever said, any other teacher has ever thanked them for being there. I think that says everything we need to know about how we see ourselves, how the system sees you, not as, and kids will tell me, we go down, they'll say, well, what do you want on this assignment? And I'll say, well, it's your assignment. This is your work. I'm here to foster you. You're not here to foster me. I make it very clear to every student I've ever had, I work for you. You don't work for me. I work for you. And I think that if we could switch to that mindset.
Right. Right.
But systemically and institutionally, and I would say this, like this is our where we're together and where we're apart. The together part is the system is jacked up, and that's a problem. It's a problem that we don't see this the way it should be. It's not student centered, it's teacher centered, it's organizational centered. And I think that a lot of what would come up is, well, they do this to indoctrinate us. They do it because they're lazy. like that's what it is. It's laziness and fear that if you empower the students, that somehow that disempowers you, right? As a teacher, or that disempowers you as an organization. And so I think in that's where we have to flip it on its head and thank our students.
Wouldn't you say those go hand in hand? Because I feel like the indoctrination is designed
Right.
to empower a system where those who don't work gain from those who do. And I'm not just talking about the government stealing money via taxation either. I'm talking
Right.
about like the
Entrepreneurship.
I'm talking about like the factory who the CEO basically does nothing and the workers do a lot.
Right.
Or the situation where like uh, a guy will like buy up all the houses in an area, and then poorly maintain them
Right.
while charging off the wall prices and driving up the price of living in the area,
Right.
not
Right.
actually caring about who needs housing and why. It's sort of like I think the system of schooling, the reason it does this sort of laziness is because they're preparing people for a world that acts the same, where instead of having systems designed to work the best for those who actually do the job, who actually do the work, a lot of the people like form this lazy pattern of, well, as long as I can get other people to do enough of it for me, I won't have to do so much. I think the laziness is what they're indoctrinating people toward, to serve the interests of people who are not serving them well.
I think and it's almost like splitting hairs at this point because I don't think like I would put it this way, but I don't think the difference between what you're saying and my saying, like I don't think the difference between those two things matters as much as what's actually happening.
Right.
But I would put it this way that I having been on the side of that negative reception of there's a new way to do things. Let's make this student centric. You know, I've had arguments where I don't I grade holistically. So each individual person has their own grading system, right? I don't grade against, I grade just for them. Like I think of, okay, I'm working with you. How would I feedback to that? And what you get is, well, that's not fair. And I'm like, well, it's not fair to who? Well, it's not fair to him over here because he has more than what the other person has, and yada, yada, yada. Wait, no, I'm not worried about, I'm taking care of that one, but I'm taking care of that one too. The interaction is not between them. And I think it's a lot easier. I think that laziness, I can see what you're saying, that the laziness is to reinforce the laziness within the people that are in the system teaching. That would make sense. Yeah.
And
Okay. I
and
agree with you.
and additionally, there's the factor that like if you can get all of these, this is the reason that I constantly refer back to the wall, because I think it's a perfect analogy for the way that the school system has worked, is that it's not designed to create individuals who have fostered within themselves a yearning and a lust for education.
I agree.
It's not designed to form self-guiding,
But it should.
self-regulated people. It's designed to form conformity. You know, that's the reason. I know you want to talk about this, so we'll touch on that as well. But that's the reason there's a dress code. Um,
Oh,
because the system is designed to get people to accept rather than understand and agree with the way it works, instead of being themselves and knowing how they are, and forming those things based on like what they want. They're told that they gotta be a specific way, and if they're not, they're the problem. That conformity is, it lends itself extremely well to the like sort of mode of production of
right.
trying to be a cog in the machine, trying to be like as useful as possible, but only within the context of how the machine has already been working. Nobody has to change anything, but all the new people, they have to conform. They have to be broken down and shoved into a mold, you know?
Do you feel like, I guess this is the question I would ask. Do you feel like, because I don't disagree with anything you say, but do you feel like that's a cognizant choice? Do you feel like this is and the
Um,
wear choice, or it's more like, you know, I don't remember the psych term, but it's running in the subconscious. In other words, that it's just sort of keeping on, and everybody sort of does the same thing, rather than you know like having this sort of sinister, yes, we're going to get together and make everybody, you know what I mean?
well, I think it's a mix of both.
Okay.
I think there's a certain percentage of people, especially at the administrative and funding levels, where the common person is sort of de-emphasized in the face of what the sort of bureaucratic administration wants the school to be like, and
That makes sense.
and so like I think sort of these faceless, shadowy people that decide what goes on the curriculum, what's allowed to be said, what will get you your funding cut if you talk about that sort of thing, or if you do, or if you try to change the system in a way. Ultimately speaking, I think that it's sort of the same as it is everywhere else, where there's an undercurrent from an overarching control system that most people have just learned to go along with, and in their subconscious, they have
Right.
just learned to set the subroutines and work within the system and not rock the boat too much because they don't want to deal with the consequences. But so they're sort of being the bigger cogs in the machine. You need all the little cogs that are the children. They're the ones who keep the system running. They're the ones who make sure that the school gets funding to begin with, because with no students, there's no money that comes in, right? So
Right.
there's that element of it. So you've got those small cogs, and then the bigger cogs, which are sort of the teachers who go along to get along and try to, work within the system, regardless of the impact it has on kids. And then there are the cogs that sort of like push against the system and sort of like work sort of in a way that would be better for the smaller ones, right?
Right.
And those ones are the ones that usually get stripped. Those ones get fired. Those ones get spat on by administration. Those ones get destroyed. And ultimately, the administration itself, the overarching control system, they're the ones who decide in the end that those gears get to be stripped. They're the ones who decide that the ones who are conforming with the system and like helping the system the most, they're the ones who get funding. They're the ones who get support. They don't get fired. But the ones that are being a problem for the way that the system would normally run for an orderly way, they're the ones like the system is designed to engender multiple levels of support, and anybody who sort of goes against that is going to be broken down. And I think that that's the reason most people just go along to get along and don't think about it too much. It's not that they're actively malevolent in that particular case, it's that they're not working against the actively malevolent ones to an extent that would change anything, if that makes sense. So the
Yeah.
system is run by both the active and the complacent, and the apathy is what is the lifeblood of the state,
Yeah.
effectively.
Take it. So when we talk about, and I think that the whole idea, the whole concept of dress code is probably the it is such a cornerstone of everything that's wrong with our educational process. That when you listen to conversations about why dress codes are enforced, how much time, effort, energy is put into them in meetings, how often do we talk about dress code, um, and the number of suspensions, the number of removals from classes, and how dress codes sort of interact with education, is that the most fundamental right that we have as individuals is the right to our own body. And whether we're talking about pulling up our pants, or do they wear a belt, or do you not have a belt, or are your pants sagging, not sagging, or down to what color shoes we have. is really what we're talking about is an issue of body control. And to have, a large section of our educational system dedicated to these sort of body control issues really states to what you're saying about how the system is, if you are more worried about whether a child has a belt or not, or whether a child's shirt is tucked in or not, if you're more concerned about that than the student's ability to write, speak, and intelligibly, and coherently produce, to translate their thoughts, their beliefs, their individuality into a communicative device, whether that be text, chat, email, letter, essay, whatever sort of written thing. If you're more concerned about whether that child doesn't have a belt than whether they are able to communicate, then we've lost our way. I don't even think it's a debatable thing. And what the feedback that you get, and I think this really reinforces what you're saying, is that the feedback that you get when you talk to them is, well, that's the way it is in the real world. No, it's not. In the real world, you're allowed to dress however you want. Well, that's not the way it is at work. Yes, it is. You can't dress anyway, but there's the actual limitations in a work setting as to how you can work. Well, you have to wear a uniform. Most jobs you don't, or if you do, there's a actual reason why you have to do it, not aside from, so for instance, a butcher will wear certain things. That's because it's hygienic, not because they're trying to enforce some sort of butchering, standard of societal behavior. It's
Right.
just because we recognize that as a butcher. And that's, there's an actual reason why they wear the smock, because they don't want to get their clothes all bloody. But
And,
you're trying to
and like
enforce
anti-slip shoes so that they don't slip in the blood and shit.
exactly. And so when you talk about children, and well, this is the way it is. No, it isn't. When you say, okay, well, they can't have this or that, there are limited number of jobs that want now. But here's the thing: is they have a choice. This is the thing that always I bring up whenever I can. There are only two places that you have no choice whether you're going to be there or not, and that is prison and school. Those
Right.
are the only places that you have to be. And so, yeah, you may say, okay, well, this is what I say. We're trying to say, well, they don't have a choice out there. They do. They take jobs where they can have pink hair. If that pink hair is part of their identity, why would they take it away? But we take it away because we have that right, because they have to be with us. And so that enforcement, that hubris of enforcement, that hubris of body control, or well, they shouldn't dress that way because they attract the wrong attention. They're attracting your attention. You're the one that's a you problem, not a them problem.
Right.
And so we project a lot of our sort of standards onto these kids rather than allowing them to develop their own individualistic style, their own individualistic, methods of expression. And mostly they'll impress you. They will give you more than you expect, but you have to give them the room to grow. And it's almost like we intentionally container our pots in places that are too small to keep them contained so they don't run wild. And so in that, we actually force them to be smaller than they actually are.
Right. And that's one of the things I experienced regularly. And this is something I was super pissed about. The administration and the state approved psychologists and shit like that, they basically told me I was ADHD, and I had, potential oppositional defiance disorder. but I didn't find out until I was an adult, and this fills me with homicidal rage that I didn't find out until I was an adult that I am hypermetabolic and bipolar. Um, because if I had known those two things, I would have been able to use what I know now and live better. And the school system didn't care about any of that. They were wondering what was wrong with Jeremiah literally every single minute of the day that I was in their presence. And
Rather
it,
than how we can help you, how we can get you to fit better in your little pot.
right. And so,
Yep.
like, instead of understanding that maybe I was bipolar, maybe all I needed to do was be given some space to breathe when I was in a depressive trough. Maybe I should be allowed to like slow down on my work then and speed up when I'm in a manic phase. They didn't give a shit about any of that and they weren't interested in it. Plus, it was still called manic depressive disorder then. It wasn't called bipolar. So, like, I would have had this massive stigma. Oh, he's manic and or depressive. Like, I already got accusations that I was going to shoot up the school. So, like, this wouldn't have helped at all. Um,
Right.
so the whole like I feel like the school also actively works against kids' psychological interests, and basically if the kid doesn't conform and therefore doesn't do well enough, then fuck that kid. That kid can be a statistic, that kid can be cast aside, that kid was a bad kid. It's all that kid's problem and not at all the adults that created the framework. Like when there's a song by a band called Ministry. They're fucking awesome. I like most of what they put out. And generally like the song is called So What, and it's about kids who grow up to be criminals and spree killers and shit. And it has this voiceover of I don't exactly know what it was, but I actually want to listen to it if it's a full lecture. I keep meaning to look it up but not doing it. And there's like this line: adults create the world children live in. Juvenile delinquency is always rooted in adult delinquency. And in this process, parents play a key role in, uh, like, basically defining a world worthy of respect. And, like, I think that sort of drives at the heart of the issue is that adults are creating a bad framework and then blaming kids for it. Because the kids aren't the creators of the framework. If the system fails, it's not the fault of the people who the system relies on. It's the fault of the people who built and maintain and run the system. So I feel like a lot of these people they just expect a kid to either conform or die, and I feel like the broader sort of state capitalist modus that this system runs on is the reason for it, because when you end up with this mentality, it's sort of like work or die, be consumed, you're a product, you're a number in a system, and get used to it. Because that's how the real world is. And instead of like working against that and trying to change it and moving the back against the gears of the machine, most people just choose to become a gear in that machine themselves and, do well enough that they get enough grease that it doesn't hurt too much.
Yep. There you go.
Um, and I feel like dress code is one of those things too, because it's sort of like, why are you stopping this girl because her strap is too thin? Why aren't you worried about whether or not she's doing well in school, whether she wants to learn? Why are you calling her outfit disrespectful of the system rather than making a system she wants to respect?
Why is it any of your business?
Yep.
I mean, it's not. I mean, outside of things that are obviously, hugely problematic or not safe, the problem is the enforcement. It's not what's going to make things work. Enforcing dress code is probably the most wasteful thing, and in the end result, what are you going to do? Like your answer, the answer to dress code problems is almost universally remove the student from the classroom. That literally should always be your last. That aside from safety issues, the one place that student actually needs to be is in the classroom by the definition of who we are and what we are doing, which is to educate. not, you know, all the other things. Anytime you say something like, and you hear it all the time, well, they need to learn life lessons, or, you know, they need to learn how it works in the real world. There is zero correlation between school and the real world. It is not a correlation. It is a place to prepare students for what they're going to face, give them the tools to be able to thrive. But it's not, and I understand what you're saying about conformity, it's not to get them to fit in a particular box, because the vast majority of people you're going to lose on the way. Every person has a superpower. And instead of empowering, what you're trying to do is put the plant in the smallest possible pot you can. And that's not going to help that plant thrive.
Well, you know, I would say though that I think it's exactly designed to mirror the world that the system wants to create. Because, for instance, they started to install security cameras in schools when I was in high school. And I felt oppressed going everywhere. Like, there cinder block construction walls, fucking barbed wire on the top of fences, and cameras at every corner, shit ass food, conformity, and rigid yard rules with a very short amount of yard time between sentences in these concrete boxes. It's basically a prison. And the mentality of it was don't do anything too special or you'll piss off the warden. Or you'll piss off one of the groups that is also conforming and formed whatever clique they have. And with this mentality, with this sort of, I think, personally dangerous mentality, um, the mentality that it like sort of creates, the mentality that it wants people to thrive with, is conformity. Um, and I think society in general these days, especially, wants that conformity. It wants people to find whatever niche isn't threatening to the status quo and stick to it. Stay in your lane. Don't talk too much shit about the system. Uh, operate, regulate, and don't step out of line too far, or we will crush you. Everywhere in normal society is monitored exactly like that now. There are cameras on every street corner. There's cameras in everybody's hands that can be accessed by the government. There's listening devices everywhere. Everywhere is constantly under surveillance and control, and the police state is dramatically broadening by the day. So I feel like the schools are actually preparing people for the real world, but the real world that the state wants to create, rather than the real world that could be the more positive, bountiful, plentiful, awesome world that we could have with more peace in mind. And I think that they're trying to create the model citizen in that world by creating that conformity mindset in the school system so that they can have an easier time controlling them there, and so that that can translate into the control matrix that exists outside of it, which is why it all started off with Schule, the Prussian school system, where the whole thing was designed as a method of increasing nationalist fervor. Like, that's the reason that schools start out with the Pledge of Allegiance. One nation under God. They can't even consent to a field trip on their own, and you're saying that they can pledge allegiance to not only your nation but your God? Leave them alone.
But think about this though. It doesn't have to be that way. You
Well,
feel
yeah.
me?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be that way, and it shouldn't.
Both of us see a broken society, right?
Right.
We both in different ways. I wouldn't say a broken system in a lot of ways, not a broken society. But but just like you go, okay, we need. I do this because you told me this. You do it with the hope that enough people will see this and be able to act on it,
Right.
which will save us, right? And that's sort of your thing. And my thing is, there's a lot that I agree with you. Obviously, I'm not happy with the educational system the way it is. However, my counterbalance to what you're saying would be this: that in the functionality that we can agree that the system is flawed in a deep and fundamental way, doesn't mean that it has to be. In
Right.
other words, if we can embrace this concept systemically, that we are there for the kids. I mean, just this simple start, a mindset of thanking our students for being there. You know, you think how many times you've been in school and no one has ever thanked. That's something, instead of shoe checks or body checks, or instead of, like you said, any sort of indoctrination, whatever it is, instead of starting with that, let's start with the basic concept of thanking those students for entrusting their education to us. If we can start with something like that, we can build a better system.
Right. Well, and again, like I'm saying how it is. I'd love it to be a
Right, I
different way.
agree.
Um,
Yeah,
and
I 100%.
and one of the things that I encourage: homeschooling, unschooling, Montessori, Waldorf, just there's things that people can do. Self-directed learning is so superior in my view. Like, I have learned more since I have been an adult, in the 10 years I've been an adult, than I ever learned in the 14 years of like schooling that I had. Well, around there, whatever. Um, I'm calling it that because I went through summer school as well. I fucked up summer school because and I tweeted this out that, like, RT, if summer school felt more like a prison sentence for the bad kids than an opportunity to fill in the gaps for your education, and it's already got some RTs on that. Like, my mentality is that, like, the system itself is what's creating the systemic flaws in schooling. Like, I've got a comment in chat that sort of says it well. Mr. Knight says schools are run by the state; they can get away with certain things, and the state has created these criteria because the state is a hammer, and every hammer is in search of a nail. So they operate by this force mechanism because that's what they know, that's what they understand.
But it doesn't have to be that way.
It doesn't have
It's
to be that way,
just like,
but, like, that's the thing. We have to strike at the root. And like
okay,
and
let's talk about striking at the root, right? So the root of the problem, and this is how we sort of look at it. The root of the problem is society in general, right?
right.
Like, there is this systemic, whatever it is, to conform to, like, a community standard, to make sure that every little person is a hammer for the nail, right? Or
Right.
a nail for the hammer.
And of course the individual problem is that they conform to that system instead of not being the hammer. But yeah, basically.
So my point is, like we can talk about deschooling, homeschooling, and to be quite honest, and I told you this in the beginning, I am 100% for homeschool.
Right.
If a parent feels like they can properly educate their child, there are people who do not need to be doing this, for sure. But if a person feels like they can homeschool and they're capable of doing it, mashallah, I think they should.
Right.
However, we have a large number of people who are not
Right.
able to, not because they can't mentally, but just whatever their needs transcend that. So if you got an answer for that, I'm all about it. And that's where we talked about that mass 51 million or whatever, enough people to where they can support it. But right now, what we have is we have a broken system that is extravagantly wasteful when it comes to kids' lives. It's not productive and needs change.
Well, one of the
And
things I think could be helpful is not calling what I experienced continuation school. I thought continuation school was the school for the either the stupid or the criminals, and that made me not want to go there, even though I was offered the
yes,
opportunity to start there from the beginning of my high school. I think if school
can I say,
operated,
hold on. I meant to say this earlier, and I've not had a chance to say it.
go ahead.
I'm a professional educator, and I'm very sorry.
No, it's not your
No,
fault. You're all the way over there.
hold on. It's my responsibility as a professional educator, as somebody who is part of the system, to apologize when our system fails somebody.
Mm.
And I don't mean that as a platonic apology. Whether we were on a podcast or whether we're out just hanging out or whether we just grabbed a beer and you told me this story, and I got caught up in the podcast part of it, but I do mean that.
Mm.
That goes to the core of what needs to happen is we have these massive failures. And it's not enough to sit in a meeting and say, well, we need to do this better. Okay, well, that's cool, but let's make sure that we are letting other people know we failed and that we need to apologize and we need to accept the measure of what we have done wrong and not gloss it over. And I'm going to give you an example of that. In the city of Memphis, we have something called an alternative or an optional school system. And the school is literally broken into two tiers in these optional schools where you have students that are the bright, the best, and whatever, and we advertise them and we pull them from other community schools to get these best and brightest into these optional schools. And so there's a number of these schools in Memphis. The problem is the optional schools were originally all the white schools.
Mm.
So what they did was they took a racist, broken system, and instead of understanding the ramifications of that racist, broken system, they just simply incorporated it into a new system of exclusion and never took responsibility for it and never apologized.
Right.
And think about that our entire system, and we are one of the most progressive cities in the United States when it comes to education, one of the largest, we have the largest number of Black teachers in almost any school system in the United States. And yet we openly accept the fact that our optional or our better school system literally has its roots in segregation.
Yeah. Well,
so when we don't apologize, when we don't own our mistakes, that's the insanity that happens.
Right. Well, so, but my point in bringing that up was there are better ways to do this, and I think one of the prime ways would be a credits based, like assignment to credits system, like what I had, because if I was allowed to learn at my own rate the whole time I was in school, I would have graduated probably when I was 13 or 14. Like,
or what you could have done is you could have pathed yourself to where, whether it's art, technology, have the ability to ramp yourself up
right.
to an even higher degree, studying what you want to study,
right.
not what the system tells you to study.
Right. Like, and so the whole idea, I think, should be to let, because every kid has a different body, a different metabolism, a different home life, a different psychology, a different religion, a different like mental system. And I think that the fact that the school system is so based in conformity means that they're not interested in fostering that individuality, and they're not interested in them thriving personally. As if they can thrive personally, it's almost an insult to the rest of the people who didn't, because those people were operating on the same system, but they couldn't. So it's like we've got to make sure that everybody like looks relatively similar. Nobody outshines anybody too much, and that system is like detrimental as fuck to people who actually want to learn, to people who want to go on to learn more in their adult life. And I think that it's one of the reasons that society is the way it is to begin with. Like, I think the individual level needs to be respected a lot more. Like, I'm not an Ayn Rand person much, but she was right when she said that the smallest minority on earth is the individual. And I think that people don't get that with the system the way it is. Like, a good example that I know you're like upset about is the standardized test practice.
Right.
and how that's biased in favor of existing structures and like maintaining the privilege for certain groups. So maybe you could talk about that a little.
So, so this is a good example of how standardized tests do not, and to be quite honest, this is one of the things where we change, like the system changes, but we're like 10 to 15 years behind reality. So, so we're trying to change more to an ACT college board system. But if you actually look at colleges are moving away from that as a measure of success. So the same things that we're moving more to try to strengthen are not the things that are actually out there going to measure what's going to be successful. A good example of that is I've worked with some students, not necessarily the super high end, but these are students that struggle. At the high school I first taught at, the average ACT score was a 14. So that was the median, right? So everybody was, we had students, that was half. More than half of them were less than that. And so, but that's not any sort of measure of value or worth of the child or the scholar or what the scholar can become. It's a very narrow measure of your ability to do a very specific task within a very specific window, and everybody measured exactly the same.
Regurgitation
And
too. It's not about learning, it's about absorbing and then jizzing it onto a page.
yeah, or in a lot of ways, what it is recognizing the patterns.
Yeah.
You just, if you can recognize the pattern, then you're good. You know, and it doesn't really measure the value of a person. And so, when I first started working with students, this is the thing that I noticed was that, you would have students and you would talk to them, and I'm looking at their work, perfectly fine, perfectly normal work, but then they would go out, they would test, and these test scores were just tremendously low and capped. Like we couldn't break through those higher numbers. And one of the things, tell me if you've ever heard this, if you've ever heard a teacher say this. Have you ever heard a teacher say, "Don't write the way you talk"?
Yeah, which is not
That's one of the
good.
dumbest things I've ever heard in my life.
Yep.
Like I am literally, literally, that is the dumbest thing anybody can say, because the best writing actually sounds like you're talking. So, and what that does is, so the student goes in and they're thinking, don't write the way you talk, don't read the way you talk. So what's in my head, my instincts are so wrong that I should do the opposite of what I think is right. And it's insanity. It just literally is the dumbest thing. And that's one of the mantras that we have as educators. It's almost like when I mentioned that to somebody, well, yeah. And I'm like, no.
What
And
and
so,
the best part is that like the curriculum for things that kids read are written by writers who didn't fucking follow that goddamn rule. Like Shakespeare didn't fucking like he wasn't censoring
you're sitting
himself.
there,
Mark
you're sitting
Twain.
there handing them, that was funny because, you're sitting there, you're handing them Melville to read, who certainly, didn't follow any of the rules of writing, or Faulkner, who followed none of the rules of writing that you're saying, and he's espousing that as great writing. Like, come on now. Or Shakespeare, who literally, you're having them read Shakespeare silently and then grading them on it. Like,
Right.
what kind of insanity is that? Shakespeare was never intended to be read. It was intended to be acted out, but you're having them read it for content. It's that's the systemic nonsense, and it goes to the core of what the problem with standardized testing is that it only measures a very narrow band. And of success. And this has been something that systemically they've done in the state. Or this is a better example. One of the things you'll always hear is American school systems are failing compared to the rest of the world. You've heard that.
Yeah, no. The rest of the world
Okay,
is
so you
fucked
that.
too.
And so then they'll say, you measure everybody in the world, and we're number 7 in whatever standardized test it is.
Yeah.
Okay, well, here's the problem. The students, Japan tests extremely high, but Japan doesn't test all the students. They don't even have all their students going through high school. So you're not comparing things, even within the standards that we use to compare our own education system to others are completely messed up. But we just accept them as same thing with kids. We're looking at kids and comparing things that do not compare or measure what a child's value is. Einstein never took a standardized test. It was perfectly fine with that. So.
And it's just, I can't not say this because, I am an anarchist asshole over here, but like this is just Western chauvinism. That's what it is. It's the West is the best, and so we'll compare like by these Western standards ourselves to the rest of the world, and by that token also say that if the rest of the world isn't conformed to our Western standards, they're wrong. It's like that. I don't know how
Okay.
much like angry music you listen to, but it's like Rammstein's America. We're all living in America. America is wonderbar. And the whole thing is like sarcastic and angry because, like, of course it's not fucking wonderful. It fucking sucks. Fuck you. Like, so the whole mentality is that, like, if people aren't doing what America wants, they're part of the problem. And if people in America aren't doing what America wants, then they're the problem too. We've got to not only spread, like, by imperial might and the like, hundreds of military bases around the world and the intelligence and military industrial complexes and all this stuff combined with the corporations that have like infected the planet. All this stuff combines to basically mean that people are trying to create their place in this conformist hellscape, and if anybody doesn't conform to the standards, either domestically or foreign, they're the enemy and they have to be nuked, proverbially speaking. So it's like that in my opinion. I might be being massively dramatic about this, but I don't know. Like I think you probably at least somewhat agree with that.
Oh yeah, I think that when we look, and I was thinking too. So if we're gonna do, you may have seen, there was a movie. It was a documentary about spelling bees. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
I have not. I've not seen
Okay,
any documentary
it's
about
a great
spelling bees.
documentary, but only for one moment. There's one moment of that documentary, and I'm trying to remember. It was the one that actually later was turned into a fictionalized Aquila and the Bee, was
Mm.
taken from that documentary. But in it, there's a teacher, and she's talking about, they're talking about their individualized students, and these students are, fairly diverse. They took a fairly diverse slice of kids. So this kid or this teacher said, I just I love when I get an Indian kid in my class because I know they're going to do great. And now this isn't something that she whispered. This is something that she was proud of and said out loud and was in a main release movie about education, and no one said anything about it. But when you
Fuck.
break it down, what you're saying and how you're saying it and what you're really saying and the historical significance of what you're saying for other groups, for that group, you're saying an awful lot.
Yeah.
You're saying the solid part out loud. And it says a lot about what you're saying about our identity of how we see culture, how we see societies that are different than our own. And it says a lot. It says a lot about it.
Well, especially since like what she's implying is that American kids aren't taught as well as Indian kids, which no, there's still fucking poor people in India, and the idea that there aren't is like, what? There's a caste system there. Like, there's a caste system everywhere, just to be clear, but there's a caste system there. So to act like they're all gonna be just as good
But
as one
can
another
you
and
say that
better.
it actually put you in a school, at a basic, normal public school in India? She would probably last about 2 minutes, But uh, man, yeah.
Yeah. Well, and this, I think the worst thing about that mentality is it's not about trying to improve the system. It's about trying to find people who make the system seem all right. Instead of asking why she prefers them, she's just saying, "Oh, it's a sigh of relief, breathe relief. I can have an easier time now," rather than just asking why there was such a hard time to begin with. Like, and like, just to be clear, I think one of the primary problems here is funding, because I think that a significant amount of schooling could be better if it was better funded. Like, I know for a fact that there are so many fucking teachers who have to pay for their own supplies. That if they want to do something cool, they have to buy it. Um,
The bigger this is I think this is even the bigger problem if we look at, and I've always been somebody who said the system educationally, and this is what I would say: what we're doing now is better than what we did 20 years ago, which is light years ahead of what we did 100 years ago, except in a couple things. And the first thing is the number of students in class.
right.
The number of students that I have now in the school, basic, or the number of students that a basic public school teacher would have, the number of students they would have today was illegal 10 years ago.
Right.
And the only reason that they're doing that is to try to, to maximize, efficiency or productivity rather than maximizing educational outcome. It's not something that measures well in dollars as it does in how you surgically use it.
Right.
This is another great example of it. We could make one change. This is the truth. We could make one change to high schools, public high schools all across America. We could do one small change. And I could go into meetings. I could go into any school board and talk to the school board members that are making those decisions. I could ask them, hey, if we do this, would this increase in performance? And they would say 100%. All of us would, but we refuse to make that change.
Mm-hmm.
And the change would cost us no money. And everybody would agree with it, but nobody's willing to do it. And that would be start school at 8:30. If we move start high school to 8:30, it would maximize student performance. And there is no educator, there is no principal, there is no school board, there is no superintendent that would disagree with that simple statement. And yet, because of the system being the way the system is, and flexible, they refuse to make that simple change. That simple change would improve education dramatically across the nation. It's a simple change, but you would never get a single school board in America to pass that change, even though they know it would be better for the students.
I've read multiple studies. Like, one of the things that I do now as an adult that I never thought I would do as a kid, I read science papers that aren't assigned to me.
Yep.
I use services that are totally legal, I promise, to access these science papers,
Oh, yeah.
and I read them with speed readers to make sure that I can get as much of them in, as many of them in as possible. And I've read multiple research papers that suggest that the neurological damage that occurs from low sleep and waking up too early, and like especially as youth, is huge, like immeasurable.
This
And
is not even controversy. Like, we all agree. But I guarantee you, if you took this simple truth and you said, look, if you walked in, you pick wherever you are in the nation and go, you know what? I'm just going to test. I'm going to see what happens, right? And so you put yourself on the school board docket and you get up and you go, you know what? I have a suggestion. It's a simple suggestion that will cost us no real money. It will improve your student outcomes and it will make students' lives better. I have this simple suggestion. It will cost you nothing or minimum amount of dollars, and you don't have to change anything else. And this is what it is. We need to start high school 8:30. You know, everybody's going to agree it's better for the kids, and it'll be voted down every time.
and it's better for the teachers too. Like they don't
It's
fucking
better
like
for
that either.
everybody. It's better for everyone. It is better across the board. But you're never going to find anybody that's going to agree to that.
Like also you could even make classes shorter that way because they'd have more energy and they would absorb more fucking information.
Exactly. And check out this. We start high school so early that we have to instill aftercare systems to keep the children until the parents can come get them.
Right.
So like literally, we're starting so early that we have to install new systems. And a good example, and we could, not to try to bring up a political thing, but Kamala Harris had put out a bill when she was a senator to create a system that was expensive, right? And it cost a lot of money. None of that would have been necessary if we just start school later. You know, it would have taken care of itself. And we put students at risk because they're walking home alone. Child abductions happen. That's most of the violence happens on the way home after school. We can eliminate all that.
Well, and you know, just to be absolutely clear, I'm gonna get political here for a second. Fuck Kamala. That fucking cunt is such a problem, and like
No,
the fact that she laughed when people brought up the fact that like her truancy programs were harming poor families. Nah, I am not on Team Kamala. She is not good for anyone.
okay, but I mean, you see my point. My point
Yes.
was about here's a bill. Here's a bill that is absolutely something that's needed. We need after school care. But the reason that we need after school care is because we're starting school too early.
And because she locked up a bunch of poor families' parents, but you know.
Take Kamala Harris out of the system. What I'm saying is we start.
Yeah,
This is the problem. Oh, bring up something we can agree on, and you're going to run over here. The thing that we don't agree on.
Yeah.
I'm like, no. Come back to the agreement part.
What?
Let's huddle over here. This is fun. I know they don't last forever. I know we got our disagreements, but let's at least stay over here where we can agree. The
Yeah,
system
sure.
sucks. Let's
Yeah.
go back over there.
Well, so the whole notion to me, I think, is that they don't want to alter the system because that would mean less funding to the system. So it's sort of like that who would build the roads in Anarchotopia's question, like, well, who would like these jobs be for? What would we do without all this money going to these aftercare programs? Who would deal with the kids? Well, nobody, because they would be with their parents, and the money could go back into the economy instead of funding worthless programs that are actually contributing to harm.
But my overall point, and what I'm trying to say is that we talk about the inflexibility of the system and how the system we go back to when I said I always thank my students for being in the classroom, right?
Right.
But think about this. This is a simple change, right? It's a simple change that has been turned on its head because it's more convenient for the system than it is for the well-being of the students. In other words, we are putting the convenience
Right.
of the system over the convenient over the well-being of kids. And I think that any time you have an individual or a system in education who does that, then that's the root of the problem. That goes to exactly where we're not doing what we need to do.
Right.
And that's where we need to fight to make to get to the root of the system. The root of the system is put the individual. Let's see the individual as important. Let's see the students as more important than the system.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're getting close to wrapping, but like, what's the primary thing? I think, like, what would you say is the primary thing that you would tell a teacher who is struggling to find their way through the concrete here, like a flower sort of working its way through the concrete?
So this is the first thing I would say is that you can make yourself. There's two strategies, and you by being like, okay, so this is a good example, and I think this really goes to the root. I'm going to brag on myself a little bit, but it goes to the root of the answer. So when I first started this, I did it the way everybody else did it when I first started, and I was like, this is stupid. like what you're telling me doesn't work, and it's stupid. It's easy. Like, I can sit here and do this all day long. This is easy, but it ain't why I do this job, and it's stupid. So I did a couple things. One is that I pulled away from punishment grading. None of that. Eliminated zeros completely from my system. We don't do that. I used holistic grading. I've only there's students do not fail my class. Like it is literally impossible to fail me. At this point, I think out of the 1,108 students that I've taught, I've only had 12 fail, and all of them were in my first 5 years. So in 5 years, I haven't really failed anybody for anything. So and took away deadlines. We don't have deadlines. The majority of what I do is ungraded work, where it's just work to try to hone your craft. But I average a 4-point increase in ACT scores in my English classes. The average student gains 4 points in my English by allowing them to be kids, by taking away all of the tools that we use in education and do it my way. I experience massive increases, right?
Right.
And so the other thing is that what I've done is allowed students. So I was 2013 Coca-Cola Teacher of the Year, right? And the way I did that was to immerse students in a system where you write the way you talk, right? That you hone your expression, that you're honest in your communication, and that your communication is your own. It's not, don't try to write what you think I need to hear. You write from your heart and soul. And when you do that, it shines. And I've had students that have had multiple opportunities and have been very successful. And what I've done, this is the part. There are all these ideas of how you need to do something, but be honest in that teach to your heart, teach to your soul. It is your craft, and teach your craft the way that you want to. Don't try to become part of the system as much as it is be individualistic. And your classroom is your classroom. Your time with your students is your time with your students. And the other thing is never sit down. Just never sit down. And that is one thing that you will never see me do, is sit in class. I just don't. There's no reason. I don't even have a desk in my room because there's no time to, and I don't want to. I want to hang out with you guys, and I want to figure it out. And always ask yourself, what's best for them and remember that you work for them. Your paycheck does not come from your principal. Your paycheck does not come from the government. Your paycheck does not, it's not the superintendent or, human resources. That's not where your check comes from. The reason you got a check is because these 25 to 30 kids that you have in your room right now, they are trusting you with their education and that you work for them. And if you remember that you don't work for the system, but you work for the students, it makes things better.
Gotcha.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, and it also, like, stress. Okay, here's just one other thing. The whole COVID thing has people forgetting a lot about, like, health, I think. And one of the things that they've forgotten is that stress and peer pressure and all this stuff is really bad for your mental health and will later on also affect your physical health in the form of immune systems, like your ability to shed fat weight, your ability to function normally, get good sleep, that sort of thing. And I think that one of the things that people have gradually failed to consider is that the more of this sort of peer pressure happens, the less rational people become, the less good they can do, but also the less they feel powerful, the weaker they are. And I think that a lot of people who just knuckle under and do what, like, they don't think will offend people, just go along to get along. I think those sorts of things eventually result in, like, personal despair for that person. Like, even the worst teachers are still going through hell because they won't get themselves out of hell. And, like, I think that it's a feedback loop. It's like you're locked in a room and this is the only stimuli you're given, so it's the only stimuli you know. It's like that's what they learned in MK Ultra, is that if you remove everything else and only do one thing for a long enough period, you'll forget that you ever knew the other stuff. So it's like
Right.
these people are, like, locked into their fucking system and they don't even think that there is a way out. So if we can break them out of that, they'll even be better off individually. They can take a load off. They can stop being psychologically damaged, and it's better for them too. And I think appealing to that self-interest is huge.
Right. Yeah, I think that the one thing that happened, and I think that when we look back on this period of time, when we look back on this period of, isolation, the biggest thing that that I take away from it is, damn, this was a hugely wasted opportunity.
Right.
We had an opportunity to engage in education. We had a way to engage with students in the most non-threatening, positive, individual way imaginable. When you think about our conversation right now, when you think about when you've been in a relationship, or chatting, or even when you're just, chatting online, or when you're texting or whatever, that those conversations are really super meaningful because they strip off a lot of the superficial nonsense. And we could have really reached a lot of kids in a positive way. And instead, what we did was we tried to take a system that was not working in the classroom, and we tried to apply it online.
Right.
It's almost like, okay, well, this crap we did over here didn't work. So, it's going to be very important for us to take this crap over here that didn't work and put it online.
Right. Yeah.
And it's just, it's the insanity of our inability to get out of our own way and to create something more meaningful, to create something more growth driven for these students, really is an indictment of our system and why we have to fix it. Like we can disagree with where it needs to go, but until we can agree that this isn't working, and actually go, okay, look, what we've done is we have messed up, and what we've done is put a system above our students. And the moment that we did that, we failed. And we have to get beyond that. Not think of ourselves as where we want our students to go. What the new movement in education now is career development education. Okay. Who's making the determination of what career you want, and why are you making that determination? Now, you see, and so centering it not on the, and I think that this would be the place where you and I would most agree. When you look at a kid and go, how can I turn you into a more functional adult? You have failed.
Mm-hmm. Especially since you're not assessing what that function is. You're just saying.
Well, not only that, but think about this. I have three things that you always honor. You honor your past, you honor your current, and you honor your future. How are you honoring this current child by trying to turn them into a plumber when they're 15? It's fine that they need to learn that skill or whatever skill they want to learn. I'm cool with that. But that's not what you're saying. What you're saying is, well, we need to turn them into a functioning adult. What kind of childhood is that? They allow them to explore the world a little bit, and that, and if we get back to a more, God knows, I'm going to regret saying this, because if anybody I know is listening to me, they're going to laugh when I say it. But getting back to a more natural state of allowing children to grow in a more natural way is a huge positive. It's something that we should be aiming toward, not trying to hone them. It's almost like there's this wild branch and you're going to hone them and turn them into a leg for a table. Well, that kid doesn't want to be let him be a branch for a minute. Let him be feral and wild for a second too. There you go.
Yeah. Well, and okay.
I'm not for the state of nature, by the way. I think the state of nature is terrible, but I ended up having to go there. So.
Well, just like I have to make everything at least a little bit about that. So I'm just going to bring this up, that this is why I like the Sonic series, because it's all about exactly what that is. It's about being an individual in the face of conformity. So if you do want your kid to think more like that, I think that'd be a good series to get him into. But basically, so what you're saying is that schools are trying to make kids into something they're not, and trying to do that in an effect to enable a system that works against their ability to form their own interests, and because of that they're not invested enough in it to care enough to do well.
I would say that would be the worst of what we do. Gotcha. Does that make sense? That's not all we do, and I wouldn't say that so I
well, it's not what you do.
No, but I'm saying even so there's this, particularly, and I'm going to go back to the urban environment, because the urban environment is different. I'll give you some numbers. The first school that I worked with, the median income was $8,000 a year for those students' families. That's a median income. That's not, there's some people that make $8,000. No, that was the median. Half of our students, their families brought home less than $8,000. And half the students brought in more. But that's the point where we're at, where it's $8,000. So what school provides in that situation is something completely, yes, we have all this and we want students to be able to grow, and we have that. But there is a very specific, and this is where this idea of deschooling, I definitely push back against it. If you can homeschool, I'm all for it, but I see kids that in that situation, that do not need to be at home.
Right.
Like, do not need to be. That the problem is that, we are a place that would feed, clothe these students on a regular basis. And that is a societal problem that needs to be fixed. The scale of poverty, about 20% of the students were functionally homeless, didn't live with their parents. I mean, I've seen things, and I think I told you this earlier. We lost 6 in the 5 years that I worked there. I had 6 empty desks throughout the year, where 6 students died. And so, while I agree that there's a need for reassessment and a reassessment of how we do things, and that the system is a problem, also the system is, we are also the thumb in an urban environment. We are the thumb in the dike in a very
For a
real
lot
way.
of people, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, not for an insignificant number of kids. We are their only hot meal. We are the refuge that they get from abuse. We are the only place that is clean and safe.
Right.
One story that sticks out to me is I had a student. She was 16 years old and she had never had a bed. She had never had a bed. And when you start to look at that situation, there is a massive need in the urban environment. And this is also where the problem is so frustrating, because there's so much need and there's so much work to be done that we invest it in nonsense of, we're going to try to tie it, we're worried about their belt or their shirt being tucked in, or, we're yelling at them. God forbid that we are actually yelling at them for misbehaving, or we are throwing them out of school for misbehaving. This is a fact. I have had not one. This is almost a constant in my class, almost constantly. Before I moved to a charter school, this is something that happened all the time. I would be going through my roll, and I would see a student, and they would be suspended from school, and they'd be sitting in my classroom, begging me not to send them home, begging me not to snitch on them that they are in the school. They have been suspended for whatever thing they did, right? But they are literally in my classroom begging me not to send them away. Now, the system that suspends a student like that is insane, because we are the thumb of the dike, and what you literally just did was you throw that child back into the system. We've also had it the other way, where teachers have been so lazy to not actually take attendance, right? And
Yeah.
we've had that student involved in a shooting, but we're marking them present on those schools. So what can anybody do? What have we just done? What are we doing? We needed that student with us. We needed to go out and pursue that student, so that student wasn't involved in the dangerous thing that he was doing, not just to the other person that he was shooting, but him himself. But we were too lazy to take attendance.
Yeah.
And no accountability for that nonsense. I'm all for money. God knows we need more money, but in an urban setting, we need some amount of sanity of behavior, and not from a top up, not from a top heavy system that's worried about whether, your lesson plan is got the right words to it, rather than worried about, hey, you didn't actually take attendance, and you mark this kid here, and now your kid in your class is dead.
Yeah.
Because you didn't take the time to do the simple little things. and then suspend children that are actually begging to be in school. And so there is a need for systemic change in the way that we do things and positivity, but there also needs to be a recognition before we go completely to the system sucks, burn it to the ground, get rid of it, is that this system in an urban setting is there. This is a phrase, and it's horrible. It is one of the worst phrases that I've ever heard any administrator or any person told me, but I've had some wonderful administrators, and this was one of the best ones. He said, you need to be here to us. You need to be here. We need you here. But this is the thing about it. We need that kid in your classroom. And he said, listen, he said, this is the thing that they do not understand. And they, I'm talking to you, your people that are listening to me. You want that kid in my classroom. You don't want them on the streets.
Right.
Not all of them, but there are some of them. You do not want these children out there. Not only for their sake, but for others' sakes as well. We are the line that protects them and protects others. Not in the vast majority of cases, that's not true. I would say 90% of the kids, everything it's difficult for them and it's hard and they're behind and classroom behavior is an issue and lack of money and all that. But there are about 10% of those kids that are dangerous to themselves and to others. And right. if they're not there, if they're not with us, then the risk to them, I've had more than one, that I get calls saying, can you come visit me? And I'm not visiting them now. I'm going down to 201. And that's a real thing. In a deep-seated troubled urban school, that's the truth.
And I think of and this is where I can criticize my people too. Like I spend a lot of time criticizing anarchists and libertarians, and one of the things that I think we need to learn is that if we don't understand the problems well enough to not do them ourselves, we're going to end up with a state. So if we do truly want anarcho-stan or whatever, then we need to understand these problems, and we need to not mirror the behaviors that we see from the state or from the people that we consider malevolent entities. And we need to learn enough from the failures of previous systems to do better ourselves. And that means one of the things that I think you brought up that's very valuable is the poverty element. I think that the state is a significant cause of that poverty.
Oh,
I think
I totally agree.
And
100%.
like the reason I bring that up is because anarchists, if they want their anarchotopia to last, need to address those systemic issues well enough that poverty is a thing you read about in history books, rather than a thing that you still address even in anarcho-stan. And in terms of getting that done, a lot of anarchists have severe failings in having enough empathy and understanding for the plight of the common person to care. A lot of them aren't interested in, and I've been called a class reductionist for saying this, but basically we need to have the mentality that says the workers should be given some more respect than they have been given in the past, if not a massive amount more respect. We need to reform society as a whole, and do better on our own, do better as individual anarchists, or the whole system is going to crumble before it starts or after it's begun. And the one of the general vibes I get from a lot of people is they don't want to address these concerns. They would rather just pretend that once we get rid of the government, everything is going to go away and everything's going to be peachy, hunky-dory. Well, not if we don't change these systemic problems, and not if we aren't a better alternative. And so we have to tirelessly work and tirelessly self criticize and tirelessly improve, because the future is only protected by those who see its benefits and who don't like advocate the short term, the convenient, the easy over that which can heal and improve things. And ultimately, that's like a problem in any system, and it's not going to go away just because we got rid of the state. This getting rid of the state would be a step, but like nobody should act like it's the step. And I don't like. I want to burn the system to the ground, but that doesn't mean that we don't put anything in its place. And acting like that would be the solution. No, people for like millennia have learned to engage with these systems and interface with these systems. And if we don't give them something else, something better, then they're just going to go back to it, because why wouldn't they? Anarchy didn't work already, so let's switch back to what was working, albeit flawed, before. So we've either got to do Star Spangled fucking awesome and do so much better than the previous people did, or we've got to give up the ghost. And I want to do Star Spangled awesome. That's what I want to do. I want to do like a sort of groundbreaking, earth-shattering, like revolutionary change in a way that doesn't revolve this time, in a way that just sets the standard, changes the bar's location to much higher, and gives everybody the strength and the ability to reach it, who wants to. That's what I want, and I think you probably want something very similar, even if you don't want to get rid of the state entirely.
Right. I think that that's, you know, and I think that the flaw in both ways, the flaw in the thinking of, okay, well, just trust the system's doing awesome, which it's not, or, well, just burn it all to the ground, it's all going to be great, is that there are people who in both of those systems that are going to thrive, that it's going to do them well. There are people that burn the system to the ground, that is going to make their lives significantly better, and that they're going to have more freedoms, more liberty, and it's going to be awesome. There are going to be people who, if you maintain the system, are going to do great, are going to have more freedom, and be able to do whatever they want to, and this could be awesome for them. But when you talk about true urban settings, when you talk about the most troubled cities, the most troubled areas, and the thing is, this is the thing that we forget, is that urban doesn't necessarily mean just Memphis. So if you take Tennessee, for instance, Tennessee is a lot of different places, right? It's a broad state, and I grew up in the far up mountains of East Tennessee, redneck as possible, and here I'm in Memphis, which is urban, and you know, I was listening to bluegrass growing up, and now I listen to 3-6 Mafia. But here's the thing, is that if you go to East Tennessee and you go to Knoxville, they consider themselves one of the, you know, shining better examples of cities in the United States. They're the 12th most dangerous city in the United States.
Right.
And so this thing about these pockets of severe need and the severe destitution that exists are not just in urban areas, but across the nation. And that if those needs aren't addressed, then you're not solving the problems.
Right.
You know, you're solving your problem, and that's awesome. Mashallah, solve your problem, but you're not solving the problem for others. And unless if this works across the board, then, you know, and like you said, empathy and all this other stuff, and it's very easy. This is the one thing I said. It's very easy to say, well, voluntary charity can take care of it. Well, if you're not voluntarily going out and doing things and being charitable,
yes,
then you're not working toward your system. You're Once again, all you're doing is you're expecting others to do the work for you
Lip
rather
service.
than even supporting your own system. That you're saying, oh, I want the freedom to be able to do this. I want the liberty, but you're not willing to invest in your own liberty
Yeah.
because you're saying charity is the way we need to go, but then you're not being charitable.
Right. Well, and it's just like any other sort of hypocrisy too. Like, you want to talk about like violent centers. DC is the home of all these fucking cunts who are constantly talking about how they want justice and fucking we got to lower crime and everything has to be like locked down and nothing can be out of line and we've got to make more laws and it's the murder capital of the fucking world, you hypocrites. Like,
Right.
well, I mean, of the U.S. anyway, not the world. But it's pretty high up there in the world too. Um,
And this is the thing about it too. If we're going back to system problems, is you invest a huge amount of resources. You talk about how we need to protect people, how we need to make the world safer, but you invest so much money, effort, and energy into convictions that are not making it safer, where we're not investing in prevention and dealing with rampant child abuse, where we're not dealing with child neglect, where we're not dealing with violence,
hey, you
but we're
traitor!
dealing
We
with
need cop
nonsense over here.
Bearcats.
Investing in your nonsense isn't going to help this. All you're doing is creating deeper and deeper pockets of severe. A great example of this is if you ever there's a perfect. It's on Netflix. It's called First In and First Out. How many of these people that are involved in this that are simple traffic violations, failure to appear, failure to, pay a speeding ticket or expired tags or expired insurance.
In
And they
anarchist
are
circles, we
sitting
call
there
those
asking
victimless
for
crimes.
bail. Do what?
In anarchist circles, we call those victimless crimes.
Right. Where you really got this thing. And where we're talking about paperwork crime. That is lunacy that we invest massive resources. And then what we do is we take and put this person in jail. Well, then, they're not able to pay their child support or their kid is going hungry or whatever. And now, oh, well, yeah, dad was in jail for this. It just reinforces a massive despair. Then the person can't get a license, can't get a job because they've been arrested.
They can't afford bail either, or a lawyer,
Yes.
or proper anything. They can't. So they normally plead guilty to get a guilty plea, like for a reduced sentence instead of
Or,
actually having
or the
justice.
family,
Like the Innocence
or the
Project is
family comes
huge.
in, or the family comes in and they raise all this money for bail.
Yeah.
When damn, they can't even feed themselves.
Yeah.
They don't even have enough money to afford, a lawnmower to cut their grass. I mean, come on. And so, it's a case where that there are cases where I think that, and I know that liberals like me, y'all, and I don't mean to paint with a broad brush, but Cora, Democratic liberals like me, y'all look and go, damn, what is he? But this is the thing I would say. There are overlaps where we can agree. And to be able to have a conversation like you and I have been talking for a long time, and God knows we politically on a spectrum, we could be no further apart in a lot of ways. But we have a lot of common ground where we can go, you know what, we can fight these specific things. I don't care, honestly. I don't care if you say burn all the system down or you're like me, core system. I say let's join up and fight against the crap that we can fight against together.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and
Don't let the labels come between us stopping the stuff that is damaging my community. Right?
and just
I'm willing to stand with you side by side and fight this stuff. But instead, what we find is a great example is, and this is traditional conservatives and liberals, right? So when you have the mass shootings, and I have liberal friends who ban guns. Okay, you can say that all you want, but we ain't banning shit, so shut up. And you get conservatives, they're like, oh, they're just going to try to ban guns. But we all agree that mental illness is an issue. Like we all can agree that the way that we treat mentally ill people, the way that this system marginalizes and turns out, there's images where mentally ill people, like literally, there's a homeless shelter and a jail and a hospital. And what they do is they leave the jail, they go out, they they get jacked up, they go to the hospital cleans them up, picks them up, sends them over to the homeless shelter, then they can't hang it there, they go out back out to the streets, police pick them up, they go to jail. And it's a rotational thing. We all can agree that's nonsense. Like, we all can agree that there's a better way to do it. But instead, what we want to do is argue about something else. Let's find the places where we all can agree and and get some work done.
Well, also, like, part of it is the entrenched bullshit and the cunts who propagate it. Like, I can say this thing and it will trigger people. I guarantee you. Responsibly fuck, and don't do it unless you are sure you can handle whatever aftermath there might be, and peacefully parent. Stop hitting children. Stop using violence and threats and intimidation to control them, and instead allow them to blossom, foster their growth, foster their desire to be better,
What?
and
What?
be better from the ground up. Because I think violent parenting and disrespectful parenting, where parents just want to live through their children by proxy or act like their children are their servants, I think that's one of the things that leads to a significant amount of structural problems, where
Wait,
the system is mirroring that system of violent control because it's the only thing anybody has ever known.
why would you think that that would be that controversial or trigger people?
Oh, believe me, it's been that way.
Are you
Like,
serious?
I am
Because
100% fucking
that
real.
seems pretty. Like, I'm gonna be honest. Like, I cannot even come up with the angle if I wanted to argue with it, which I don't. I agree with everything you said, but I was trying to go, what on earth could offend somebody in any of that?
Because it's
Like,
critical
where
of
does this
the way that they were
fit?
raised. They learned to accept it. I was raised like that and I turned out fine. No, you didn't. You're the way you are.
Well,
That's not good.
I mean, which part are they objecting to? Not hitting their children?
That's one of the major ones. Oh, and here's another one.
Eh,
Here's another one. Circumcision. Don't circumcise. Don't cut pieces off of kids that's unnecessary. If they want to do that later on in their lives, they can do it. Most people don't get phimosis. Leave your kid's dick alone. That gets
well,
people super mad.
unless, but there could be a religious reason for it.
Yeah, but why should your religion be something that enables you to cut a piece off a child? What other
Uh,
pieces can we cut off?
no, okay. So, well, this would get really far afield, but I would put it like this. So I told you before, I'd actually taught refugees from Yemen and Syria, and so there was an argument between two girls, and one of the girls spat in the girl's drink, right? There was spit involved, and the reaction to it was massive, which I understood, but I didn't understand why. Like, there were parts of it that I didn't process. Now we can talk about, and like, why are they doing this, or what is it this way? But the overall thing is that because that happened, the girl who was involved, the girl who was spat upon or whatever, that she was in a state of uncleanliness and God could not hear her prayers.
Mm.
Now, I'm not going to judge somebody else's religion in that way where I feel like I have the ability to be able to say, well, you shouldn't practice within reason. I mean, and we can debate whether circumcision is reasonable or not, I guess. But
The trauma
But
is demonstrable. That's my problem. Like, the trauma is demonstrable, and there have been so many studies to prove that not only is it medically unnecessary, but it causes medical problems. Trauma,
well,
it
well, we could say that, but I mean, it's been doing it for 2,000 years,
yeah, but that's an appeal tradition. Like, the school system runs
right?
the
No,
same
no,
way
but
for hundreds
what
of
I'm
years,
trying
and
to
you're
say
opposed to that. So
what I'm saying is that we're judging it from the outside, but and we can say it causes problems or whatever, but this is something been going on for 2,000 years,
yeah,
and the Jewish community has by and large thrived, and then my thing is that what I done, and it's interesting. It's interesting because we're having a conversation about it, and I tend to be the more statist person. And I'm arguing, no, let their community do what their community does. You know what I mean? Like I'm actually making the more liberty
I'm not
side of it,
I'm
I
not I'm
guess.
not advocating control here. I'm saying don't do it. My words don't mean anything but my words.
Okay. I understand. Okay, I misunderstood. I thought you meant don't let them do it, as opposed to I don't think you should do it.
I'm hoping that it becomes widely enough accepted that it's harmful, that it stops by voluntary
I guess.
choice.
Okay,
If it
I can get with that. I understand exactly what you're saying.
and if it
Yeah.
doesn't stop, then it's just another brick in the wall, proverbially speaking. Like, my ultimate thing is, I don't think any of this is going to work. I think, like I said before the call, I think that this is going to end in rivers of blood and years of darkness, the likes of which will make Revelations look like a children's story. And I've said that hundreds of times at this point, but like, ultimately, it's
It's
about being it's about, like, sticking out like a sore thumb until everybody else does the same. It's about being the tall blade of grass no matter where the lawnmower is, you know?
sad. Okay, so I'm gonna cite one of my heroes that you hate, but and I'm sure that this has been something that conservatives and people that are diametrically opposed in a lot of ways to me would rail against without understanding the point. And you know who Keynes is, right?
Yeah.
Keynesian economics. Okay, all right. So Keynes said one of the things that I absolutely embrace, and I hope that we can get to the point we understand each other on it, is that Keynes said, well, everybody's going to die anyways, right? Everybody dies. And so people who interpret that wrong. What he was saying was, if you look at economics over the long term, right, it's a constant level of growth, right? So you're right that what is horrible right now, the high unemployment, high inflation, suffering, and terrible. It's terrible now, but that eventually that all corrects and the economy gets better. Or in your case, well, it doesn't matter what we do, so it's all going to end up shit anyways, right? Basically, yes.
It's something like that.
Okay,
It's closer to stoicism. And,
right.
like, if you want a non-Keynes source for that quote, it dates back to the like to the ancient days where they used to say memento mori. That's what I go by. It's sort of like, even if I fail, at least I tried. And
Right,
it
right,
it
right. Well, what Keynes was saying was is that eventually it's all going to be okay. Eventually, what you're saying, what a traditional capitalist is saying, is true, or a hands-off, more like a laissez-faire capitalist is going to say eventually, if you look at it, it's true that the economy is going to keep growing and standard of living increases. And what Keynes was saying is, yes, eventually we're all going to die. The point is that why allow the suffering in this short period of time if it's all going to be okay anyways? Let's mitigate the pain in the moment. And so, sort of what I hear from you is all this is going to like, oh, we're going to try. We're going to do the best we can. God bless this, mashallah. But inshallah, it won't be too painful. But eventually, it's going to be rivers of blood, and we're all going to die. And we're destined to fail. Okay. Then my counter to that, if that is the case, then shouldn't we be doing everything we can to
yes.
make this moment for not just ourselves, but across the board, the best moment that we possibly
Yes, and by and like the reason I bring up like how to raise children, etc., is because if you can make their lives better for their psychology, then they won't grow into the sort of person who would make other people's lives worse for theirs.
not
Make
only
it,
that, not only that, but you're going to make their childhood more pleasant.
yes. So
Honor the, do not forsake the child for the future adult.
right,
You know, don't forsake that. Do not sacrifice this child. This child in this moment is precious. They're only going to be here for a second because eventually they're going to grow and become somebody else. Let's honor who they are right now.
right. So what I'm saying is that if we peacefully parented, if we stopped acting like a child is an adult's avatar, an adult's
There you go.
an
Oh,
adult's
I like that
an,
phrase.
an adult's plaything, an adult's religious practice, an adult's etc. If we started like allowing that child their own autonomy to grow into the adult that they want to be, rather than like imposing beliefs, imposing physical punishment, imposing like emotional distress as a consequence for not accepting adults' control, if we were more respectful to children on a more broad-based level, that would form the foundation for a much better future for all of us. It would lessen pain and suffering in that child's life, and if more people did it because of the positive results that sprung forth from that, it would result in reduced suffering for the rest of us as well.
I think that's very wise.
So that's my point. That's the
Yeah.
reason I don't like things like, spanking. I don't like things like, coercive punishments. Go to your jail cell. Sorry, room. I don't like things like that, and I don't like things where they're cutting parts off children. I don't care what the reason is. So,
Okay.
like, that's my bias in that regard.
Yeah. Yeah. I still find it interesting that, this very simple statement, and I'm still like I'm still trying to wrap my head around, peaceful parenting. Be a peaceful parent, and how on earth, and do not be irresponsible in the way that you engage in sexual activity. I cannot imagine on what planet that would be controversial.
You know,
I just
some
don't understand that at all.
somebody I talked with for a while about this eventually blocked me after calling me a fascist for my beliefs. So I think
What?
I
There
think
is nothing in that. It is like totally, like, be peaceful in your parenting, and was
yeah.
and like, don't be irresponsible in the way that you engage in sex.
Yeah, I
I
promise.
understand how. I maybe I'm missing.
Well,
Maybe that's
you're missing how irresponsible people want to be and how much they do to justify their irresponsibility. Like, it's all about that from the ground up. Like,
yeah.
that's the
Well,
reason the system is the way it is. Nobody wants to fucking do anything about it because that'd be work, and because then they'd be responsible for the consequences of failure. They would rather kick the can down the road. It's why this massively inflated dollar is still going rather than being defaulted on while the US plunges further and further into debt. It's at like $3 trillion of
we
debt
get
right now,
we
just
get a
around there.
whole. Now our conversation about national debt, that would be a whole other road.
Right.
Like, you and I, that it reminds me of when you get two people that disagree and they find that one thing that they disagree about, or they agree
Well,
about, sit there and they're drinking beer over it, and then they go, oh well, now the fun's over.
well, here's the thing. What I'm saying is that everybody wants to play kick the can. Nobody actually wants to do shit about this stuff because then they'd have to be responsible for the fallout. So,
I understand.
so if you have to
I
take
don't agree
the
with you on the debt part, but I agree with what you just said.
if you have to take the reins of your own parenting, and if you can't just rely on the fact that this is the way it's always been and I turned out fine, or things like that, or this is how my daddy did it, or this is how my like religious or social structure does it.
Right.
I think that if people have to take their own reins and admit that they're the ones at the wheel, that's where the positivity comes from. But it's also scary. It means it's a risk. It means it's something that they're doing, and a lot of people would rather not risk it. A
Right.
lot of people would like rather do the safe, easy thing. You want to talk about laziness? It starts in the home.
I would agree with that. Well, yeah, I guess. I am probably the only teacher that less goes, well, the parent should be doing this because, and
Well,
because one,
I'm not saying that
yeah.
like kids in bad situations should be in that bad situation.
No,
Um,
no, no, that wasn't what I was thinking. I was thinking about how many times I hear educators say, well, if the parents would just do this, you know, and and God knows. And I mean, I've seen this with parents that drop off their kids in Maseratis, down to kids that don't have clean clothes, like they haven't had clean clothes in a month. In both situations, that I don't blame the parent for like I don't look at it the parent is the lazy nexus of it. I look that it's the education. Like as educators, we cannot use parenting as an excuse for our failure.
well, I'm not saying to do
Well,
that.
no, I was just interjecting though.
What I will say there is that educators should behave as the parents they'd like to see. So if I became a
Right.
teacher and then didn't peacefully teach the way I demanded parents peacefully parent, that would make me a massive piece of shit.
Yeah.
So
Right.
that's what I'm saying. I'm not saying that any link in this chain is small. I'm
Right.
saying that like ultimately the weak link is the one that breaks the chain.
Right. Right. It is, and and we could agree it's a systemic weakness.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. You know what we should do sometime just for the giggles of it? We should do one on debt.
Okay.
Because
At some
because
point, yeah.
oh my God, that would be the hey, and like 90%, I'd say 99% of the time we're going along, except for one little thing, where we disagree, and everything's like, yeah, we're cool, we're cool. And then the moment we go to national debt, it's gonna be like, ah, hell
Well,
no.
let me just say, how about in about a month we reconvene and we can both bring our cases to this? And if you want, by then, I think there's a guy who is interested in being a moderator on a potential debate channel that I'm gonna start. And if that guy
Okay.
gets off his hiatus, maybe we could have like a formal moderated debate, which isn't gonna be like nasty. I don't think. I think it's
No,
mostly
no,
gonna be a
no, no.
conversation.
You can hear like even when I disagree with someone, most of the time I'm like laughing.
Yeah.
like this is the one truth that I know is that me making arguments, like me arguing my case, is not like if you go into that with the idea I'm going to change anybody's mind or I'm going to prove some sort of massive point, is it's less about that than I look at the person that I'm talking to as the whetstone.
Mm.
If that makes it's a selfish thing,
Yeah.
but I see you as the whetstone that's sharpening me.
Well, I mean, I
Like
feel the same way,
yeah,
and Ayn Rand, like I disagree with her in some significant ways, but one of the things that I did retain from her is the idea of rational selfishness. And ultimately, the ultimate act of rational selfishness is to become more wise by the interaction with other people, not being the smartest person in any room. That kind of thing.
did you read Atlas Shrugged?
I did, but I didn't like it. I think it's dry and like she's not a very good writer. If I'm gonna cite anything from her, Uh, Nonfiction is the virtue of selfishness. I think that collection of essays encapsulates sort of her ideas, and of course Nathaniel Branden, rest in peace. I think that encapsulates those better than her other nonfiction works, and I also think that if I'm going to suggest a book, it's probably going to be either Fountainhead Anthem or We the Living, and it's not going to be Atlas Shrugged because fuck that book. But yeah,
What was it, like Fountainhead? Fountainhead was readable, but oh
yeah,
my
right.
god, that's right. Anthem, isn't Anthem the one? But Anthem's the one where they with the ballerina or something.
With the what?
What was Anthem? I'm trying to remember. Was that
I think it was the one with the light bulb, like the inventions and
there's
shit.
the one with something like do what now?
I think Anthem was the one with like the technology and shit, like and the people who lived in
Oh,
darkness.
that was it. Yeah, I don't think I've read Anthem. I should read that. I guess maybe.
It is short.
But
That's the other reason I would recommend those short ones because Ayn Rand for a long time is like torture.
otherwise, you're gonna have a speech in the middle, a 50-page speech in the middle, summing up exactly the entire book.
Yeah, basically. Like let me proselytize at you for a bit instead of writing.
There you go. There you go. Let me see. Hold on. Dark Age.
Anthem is
Oh,
a
nice.
dystopian
The
fiction
one
novella by
where
Russian American writer Ayn Rand, written in 1937, in the first published in 1938 in the UK. The story takes place in an unspecified future date when mankind has entered another dark age.
that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, and then
Yeah. This
and then
part of
the
I,
individual who's like not going to take being a serial number in a system, called Equality 72521. Um, I think it's supposed to be read like it's 7-2521 rebels by doing secret scientific research.
that's
It's
it.
very good. I
Dude,
haven't read it in like years though. It's been like 6 or 7.
I always wondered if Rand complained when they didn't pick up her trash on time. like,
Yeah.
like, seriously. Okay, so imagine you have Ayn Rand and her trash doesn't get picked up these days. Does she complain about it?
Or does she pull herself up by her bootstraps and take the trash to the dump
There you
herself?
go. There you go. Be your individual. Go and compost your own trash, sort it, right, and then dispose of it. Now, why are you even putting your trash on the curb if you're Ayn Rand?
Right.
You should have your own technology to where you're processing your own trash.
Also, paper trash can be gasified. You can turn that into
There you
fuel.
go. There you go. I wonder. I wonder if she squeezes like when she goes. Does she go to a grocery store? does she?
Yeah.
Does she ask to speak to the manager?
What? Well, she does have the haircut for it. Like
There
if you
needs to be a Saturday Night Live, or somebody needs to do a skit with Ayn Rand. Try the dilemma of Ayn Rand. Does she complain about the plane not taking off on time?
she she does have the haircut for it, and she always used to have the cigarette in the long cigarette holder. She was
she
always
does.
yeah.
Oh, I just want to know what Ayn Rand does. Somebody needs to write. Somebody needs to write the vignette play of Ayn Rand when her trash does not get picked up on
Right.
time.
It just results in a domino effect where she just takes it out on everybody she meets that day.
I guarantee you that she would call, imagine her calling to complain to the sanitation department. like, I just, oh my god, I don't know why that's so funny. I'm sorry. That'd be great.
Well, anyway, I
It
think
was
that
a fun.
it was funny. I think we should have another conversation. I think that having a conversation on debt would be interesting because, from an anarchist perspective, I want the Fed and the rest of the federal, not federal agencies that call themselves federal ended. I want like the ultimate like dissolution of the system. So, but like at the same time, I think we could probably agree on some systemic problems that could be corrected either way. So yeah, maybe we could organize something like that. But until then, where can people find you?
Uh, I sort of post on Twitter, I guess. Other than that, my social footprint is microscopic. Like I do not engage with the outside world. So if you want to get a hold of me, I have a Twitter handle. I don't know what it is. Do you know?
Yeah, it's your name. So
There
I'll
you
I'll
go. Oh, you can tell that I'm really worried about the man. Like I literally just put my name in the Twitter handle.
well, I will link
I
your
just hope
Twitter in the
somebody sends
description.
me here. Somebody else needs to do this for a while. The last person that sold my identity sent me an apology note and $100. So
Mm.
I
Well,
guess it's fine.
with that being said, is there anything else you want to say before we wrap?
No, other than thank you. This was one of the most enjoyable things I've done in a long time. It was a pleasure. It was joyous.
All right,
It
well,
was
good to hear.
it was awesome, but yeah, so there you go.
I'm glad to hear because like I am considered highly negative in quote liberty Twitter.
How's
So
that possible? You're one of the easiest people I've ever known to get along
maybe I'm
with.
just like abrasive to those who think they already know how everything should work.
Maybe. I'll tell you what though, like honestly, like, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart. Like, I don't think. I mean, yes, I tried to be easy to talk to, but I'm gonna be honest. Talking to you, there was no point that I felt anything other than joy.
Well, that's good to hear.
Cool.
Um, and I hope to have you back. I think we could have a
Anytime. You
more
know where
productive
I am?
convo.
I literally am my name in Twitter. I'm right there.
Well, your Twitter link is now in the bio, so if anybody wants to
Yeah.
check that, they are welcome to.
Cool. And I hope I get my passport on time.
Yeah, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to Portugal for hopefully if my passport gets processed in time. I'm going to Portugal for about 20 days to just hang out in Portugal.
Got to decompress now that you got a summer break.
There you go. Well, actually, this is the weirdest thing. Like, I miss being in school. Like,
Of
I
course.
desperately want to be back with my students. So it's actually a way to pass the time better while I'm gone, and also hopefully to be a better teacher. I want to tour some schools while I'm there too. So
And of course, you can always use this as an opportunity to reach out on social media. Because I mean, if you think social media is good for kids, then you could be one of those people that's good for kids on social media. That's what I try to do. Like I'm in contact with like a decent amount of kids who ask me advice and shit, and I just hope I don't fuck it up. So that's my goal.
as long as it goes from the heart, you're good. The one thing I would say it is for people that are really about liberty, freedom. I would highly suggest look at Lisbon and look at the videos from Lisbon. Graffiti is ever present and not illegal. So there's literally graffiti everywhere, like feral and organized. They actually have tours where people actually you get to go out and tag a wall, and that is something that they do as tourists. And also like skateboarding, like not illegal, skateboard wherever you want to, no big deal.
Hmm.
So yeah, so if you ever want to sort of see how a place that's removed from the typical controls, how it sort of looks, look at the streets of Lisbon. It's unbelievable.
I'll look into that. That might make an interesting video and/or interview series.
There you go. All right.
All right.
Peace, my brother.
Be well. All smash the state.
All right. Take care.